In July 2024, the United States Air Force did something unthinkable. They put the brakes on their sixth-generation fighter, the Next Generation Air Dominance program, despite nearly $20 billion in planned spending. One of the main culprits, engine development alone, became a roughly $7 billion line item, just for the engines. But here's what's really shocking. In 2024, every single F-35 engine Pratt Whitney delivered was late, all 123 of them. And the jets themselves? Lockheed delivered 110 F-35s that year, all behind schedule, with average delays of about 238 days. Russia's Su-57 has been flying with inferior interim engines for 8 years. China spent 3 decades developing the WS-15 engine. Europe openly admits they're 40 years behind in fundamental research. This isn't a coincidence. From Washington to Beijing, Paris to Moscow, engine development has become the invisible bottleneck, strangling every modern fighter program. And the problem is getting worse. Here's what most people don't understand about fighter aircraft development. Everyone focuses on the airframe, the sleek stealth design, the advanced sensors, the pilot helmets that cost $400,000 each. But behind every capability claim stands the same critical component, an engine that must perform what seems physically impossible. These engines must spin at 10,000 revolutions per minute while operating at temperatures approaching the surface of the sunday. They need to run reliably for 8,000 hours while generating enough power to propel a 30-ton aircraft past the speed of sound. And they must do all of this within a package small enough to fit inside the F-35's fuselage. For decades, the United States has led jet engine technology. American companies like Pratt Whitney and General Electric have been at the forefront of turbofan, afterburner, and thrust vectoring development. U.S. engines powered not just American aircraft, but Allied fighters around the world. That dominance created a comfortable assumption. When you need a new fighter, the engine will be ready. That assumption just died. The F-35 program reveals the depth of this crisis. The F-135 engine is operating roughly 13 to 17% above its original power and thermal design envelope. Internal Pentagon estimates put the extra sustainment cost at $30 to $40 billion over the life of the program if it isn't upgraded. Mission-capable rates hover around 52% against goals of 65 to 75%. And despite spending over $12 billion annually on sustainment, readiness has missed targets for at least 5 consecutive years. But this isn't just an American problem. Russia's Izdalai-30 engine, supposed to power the Su-57, remains years from production. Despite starting development in 2011, China spent 30 years developing the WS-15, only achieving limited production in 2024. France openly admits they haven't done fundamental engine research in 40 years. Europe's sixth-generation programs require material science breakthroughs not yet achieved. Meanwhile, countries like India, South Korea, and Turkey are discovering a harsh reality. If you can't build your own engines, someone else controls your entire fighter program. Congressional export restrictions can ground your fleet overnight. Supply chain disruptions can halt production for years. Technology transfer gets denied for national security reasons. The physics, materials, science, and manufacturing precision required have proven more intractable than stealth coatings, sensor fusion, or artificial intelligence. And the gap between those who can build engines and those who cannot is widening, not closing. Let's start with the most expensive fighter program in history, because it perfectly illustrates how engine problems cascade into systemic failure. The Pratt Whitney F-135 engine, powering every F-35, was born from a competition that never produced a true fifth-generation engine. It was designed before anyone fully understood the cooling demands of advanced sensors and stealth coatings. In 2008, engineers discovered the thermal management shortfall. In 2013, the Pentagon denied redesign requests, citing cost and schedule concerns. Big mistake. Here's what's happening. The F-135 is operating roughly 13 to 17% above its original power and thermal design envelope. The jet is asking for cooling and power. The engine was never built to deliver, and it's chewing itself up in the process. Internal Pentagon estimates put the extra sustainment cost at $30 to $40 billion over the life of the program if major upgrades don't happen. The numbers are brutal. Mission-capable rates for the Air Force variant, around 52% against a goal of 65 to 75%. That's after at least 5 consecutive years of missing targets. Despite spending over $12 billion annually on sustainment, the Government Accountability Office identified a $400 million funding gap just for spare parts. And production? In 2023, every single F-135 power module delivered arrived late. 123 modules, Average delay, 238 days. The F-135 Heavy Maintenance Center at Tinker Air Force Base processes engines slower than projected. They target 60 power modules yearly. Actual performance? Classified, but acknowledged as insufficient. Heat protective coatings on turbine blades degrade faster than predicted. The 2022 crash at NAS Fort Worth traced to harmonic resonance in fuel tubes, requiring emergency fixes across the entire fleet. Without major investment, internal analyses warn that a significant fraction of the fleet will be grounded for lack of serviceable engines by the end of the decade. The proposed solution, the engine core upgrade, won't arrive until 2030 to 2032 at the earliest. It targets only 10% thrust increase and 5% fuel efficiency improvement. But here's the kicker. The Air Force rejected revolutionary adaptive cycle engines from GE and Pratt Whitney that demonstrated 25% better efficiency. Why? Cost concerns and integration risks. After spending over $4 billion developing them, the F-35 is locked into incremental fixes for an engine that was inadequate from day one. And this is America's engine, from the country that's supposed to lead the world in this technology. So how bad has the engine problem gotten? Bad enough that the US Air Force hit the pause button on its most advanced fighter program. In July 2024, Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall did something that shocked the defense community. He signaled a major rethink of the Next Generation Air Dominance program, America's sixth-generation fighter, despite $19.6 billion planned through 2029. The reason? Sticker shock, $250 to $300 million per aircraft, nearly triple an F-35's cost. And a major driver of those costs, engine development that became a roughly $7 billion line item. The Next Generation Adaptive Propulsion Program awarded approximately $3.5 billion to each company, GE, Aerospace, and Pratt Whitney. That's about $7 billion total, just for engines. Former Deputy Chief of Staff Clint Highnote testified these costs were pretty high and a factor in NGAD's challenges. So what does that $7 billion need to buy? Engines with variable cycle architecture using 3-stream airflow, roughly 25% better fuel efficiency, 10 to 20% more thrust, and dramatically higher thermal management capability, potentially double what current engines can handle, to power directed energy weapons and advanced sensors. The physics demands are unprecedented. These engines must optimize across the entire flight envelope: subsonic cruise, supersonic dash, combat maneuvers, while generating substantially more electrical power than today's fighters. Turbine inlet temperatures will push materials to roughly 90% of their melting points. Ceramic matrix composites must work reliably in primary load-bearing structures, not just shrouds. Adaptive fan controls require sophisticated systems managing thousands of operating points. Every requirement multiplies complexity. Every complexity multiplies cost. Secretary Kendall wants costs down to less than an F-35, but acknowledged the current design comes at high total and unit costs that may be unaffordable. The Air Force is now considering disaggregating systems to unmanned drones rather than putting everything on a manned platform. Congress added $280 million above request just to keep competition alive between GE and Pratt Whitney. Industry officials warn that without sustained NGAP funding, the ecosystem for cutting-edge military engines will fall behind China and Russia. Think about that for a second. The United States, the country that's led propulsion technology for decades, is worried about falling behind because engines have become that hard to develop. If you think the US has problems, wait until you hear about Russia. December 2017, a Su-57 prototype lifted off with one AL-51F1 Izdalai-30 engine, Russia's answer to the F-22's F-119, alongside one interim engine for comparison. That same test program continues. The Izdalai-30, initiated in 2011, remains years from mass production despite official claims. Here's the reality. Russia contracted for 76 aircraft by 2028. They've delivered perhaps 24 to 27 operational jets total. Essentially, all of them fly with inferior interim engines derived from 1970s-era technology despite 80% new parts. The current AL-41F1 produces 142 kilonewtons of thrust. The promised Izdalai-30, 167 kilonewtons. That's a 15% deficit. Russian claims of supercruise capability around Mach 1.6 to 1.8 are disputed by Western analysts, who estimate actual performance closer to Mach 1.3 at best. Round engine nozzles, not rectangular like the F-22, significantly increase infrared and radar signatures. India withdrew from joint development in 2018, citing inadequate stealth, lack of supercruise, and engine uncertainty. That cost Russia billions in development funding. But the industrial crisis runs deeper than one engine. UEC Kuznetsov accumulated 18 billion rubles in losses since 2018. In March 2024, An NK-32 engine fire destroyed 4 engines and a Tu-160M bomber that Putin had personally flown weeks earlier. They discovered 10 additional faulty engines afterward. The facility conducted mass layoffs in December 2024, despite proclaimed defense priority. Junior engineers earn salaries comparable to janitors. Soviet-era machinery sits broken and unrepaired. They lack modern CNC tools. Single crystal turbine blade manufacturing exists, but yields lag Western standards significantly. Western sanctions block access to 5-axis and 7-axis CNC machines from Germany, Italy, and Japan. Materials science gaps persist despite a decade of import substitution efforts. Lead times increased by a factor of 10. Costs increased 30%. NPO Saturn faces limited production capacity, forcing a choice between old and new engines. They cannot simultaneously produce legacy AL-41, F1, and new Izdalai 30 at scale. Russia is at least one generation behind the United States in adaptive engine technology, with no clear path to close the gap given current industrial constraints. China's story is different. They actually succeeded, sort of. For 3 decades, China's inability to build reliable fighter engines was the Achilles heel, constraining its entire military aviation. J-20 stealth fighters entered service in 2017, underpowered, forced to rely on Russian or interim Chinese engines that couldn't deliver true supercruise. The WS-15 engine program began in the 1990s, targeting 18 to 20 tons, thrust to match the F-22's F-119. It suffered a catastrophic explosion during 2015 ground testing. By 2019, it failed final evaluation. Then came the breakthrough. March 2023, AECC officially announced WS-15 achieved full operational capability and serial production started. September 2024. First clear photographs confirmed J-20A flying with WS-15, showing distinctive serrated nozzles. By September 2025, the J-20 fleet exceeded 300 aircraft, with production transitioning from interim engines to WS-15 as the main power plant. After 30-plus years, China achieved indigenous engine capability comparable to Western designs from 2 decades ago. But critical questions persist. Claimed specifications: 180 kilonewtons thrust with afterburner, supercruise at Mach 1.3+, remain unverified by independent sources. Service life is likely substantially shorter than Western standards, perhaps 1/4 to 1/3 of the 8,000-plus hours that U.S. engines achieve. Meantime, between overhaul is believed to be significantly lower than Western engines. Single crystal turbine blade quality: China achieved mass production, but reject rates appear higher than Western standards. GE Aerospace's September 2024 assessment: Chinese engines are catching up, but still remain inferior. Operating temperatures appear to run somewhat lower than Western engines. Fuel efficiency is estimated 5 to 10% higher consumption, reducing combat range 10 to 15%. Here's a critical constraint: China still has to import a significant share of high-grade turbine superalloy feedstock. Multiple analyses note that domestic production does not yet cover total demand, creating strategic vulnerability. David Markov, an Institute for Defense Analysis expert, explained it perfectly in May 2023. Modern aviation engines, particularly supercruise fighter engines, are more art than science. There's a guy named Joe who works at Cincinnati Millicron, who's been working that thing for 30 years, who just knows through experimentation, time, and experience. And that's the part where China just doesn't have that capability yet. China's workforce includes many scientists and engineers in their late 20s to early 30s, lacking decades of specialized experience Western competitors possess. The WS-15 represents a moving target successfully tracked, no longer insurmountable, but still a significant constraint. And Europe? They're openly admitting they forgot how to do this. November 2025, France's Chief of Defense Staff General Fabien Mandin delivered a stark warning. Engine development is the most critical part of their 6th-generation FCAS program, requiring an 11-ton thrust engine, a massive leap from the M88's 7.5 tons. The challenge? It's been over 40 years since we last did fundamental research on the hot section of a jet engine. The Americans have continued. We haven't. If we don't invest now, we won't be able to do it later. 40 years. Think about that admission. FCAS, the France-Germany-Spain program, teeters on collapse due to persistent governance disputes. France demands 80% production share. Germany and Spain hold 2/3 voting power via Airbus versus Dassault's 1/3. Demonstrator flight delayed from 2027 to 2029. Entry to service now 2040 to 2045 versus original 2035. Cost estimates range from 50 to over 100 billion euros. France ordered 42 additional Rafales in January 2024 as a hedge. That tells you their confidence level. The engine technical challenge is daunting. Safran's Adamant research program, targets turbine materials withstanding 2,100 Kelvin, 250 Kelvin higher than current M88. Studies are looking at variable cycle adaptive design, but it's less mature than US demonstrations. No full-scale adaptive cycle engine has been tested in Europe versus years of US ground testing completed. The UK, Italy, Japan GCAP program shows steadier progress but faces cost pressures. Rolls-Royce leads with equal partnerships. UK allocated over £2 billion since 2021, with $12 billion budgeted over the next 10 years. Italy revised their budget from €3.8 billion to €7.7 billion through 2037, but Leonardo CEO Roberto Cingolani warned at Farnborough 2024, development will cost more than anticipated and take longer than planned. Flying demonstrator, targeting end of 2027. Service entry 2035 requires development in half the time of F-35 and Typhoon programs. The U.S. advantage remains decisive. AETP development from 2016 to 2023 invested over $4 billion, feeding directly into NGAP. GE and Pratt Whitney completed detailed design reviews in late 2024 and early 2025, moving to fabrication. Ground testing targets late 2020s. Performance already demonstrated. 25% improved fuel efficiency, 10 to 20% additional thrust, significantly enhanced thermal management. European programs are 5 to 10 years behind US timelines. The 40-year gap in fundamental research cannot be overcome quickly, despite significant investment and international collaboration. But what if you're not one of the big five? What if you're India, South Korea, or Turkey trying to build a modern air force? Simple answer, you're at someone else's mercy. India started the Kaveri engine program in 1986 to power their Tejas fighter. After 30 years and substantial investment, they achieved only 49 kilonewtons dry thrust versus an 81 kilonewton target. The program failed. They selected France's Safran in July 2025 for roughly $7 billion in co-development of a new engine. Timeline: 7 to 10 years development, production targeting the mid-2030s. Meanwhile, GE delivery delays in 2023 to 2025 grounded Tejas production. Each jet needs 3 engines over its lifetime at $7.2 million each. That's strategic vulnerability you can measure in dollars. South Korea's KF-21 Boramae represents a technical success but strategic vulnerability. First flight in July 2022, 40 Block 1 units ordered for delivery 2026 to 2028. Currently uses GE F414 engines license built by Hanwha. Performance impressive. Mach 1.8 achieved, surpassed 1,000 accident-free sorties. But U.S. export controls on F414 grant Washington effective veto power over exports to countries like UAE and Indonesia. Hanwha targets domestic fighter jet engine by 2036 at $3.7 billion cost. Critics call the timeline unrealistically optimistic. Turkey faces the harshest lesson. Their KAN fighter flew in February 2024 using GE F110 engines, the same as F-16. Initial deliveries planned for 2028. Indonesia signed an agreement for 48 aircraft, worth about $10 billion. Then, in September 2025, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan confirmed U.S. Congress blocked export licenses for F-110 engines, describing it as deliberate obstruction. Root cause: 2019 CATSA sanctions after Turkey purchased Russian S-400 systems. Turkey's indigenous TF-35,000 engine targets 2032 integration with ground testing beginning 2026. But as one expert noted, China, despite vast resources, spent decades developing its first modern jet engines. Turkey does not have China's financial, industrial, or human capital capacity. The pattern is universal. Political vulnerability inevitably follows technical dependence. Now, let's talk about why this is so difficult. Because understanding the technical challenge explains why only a handful of nations can actually do this. The Pratt & Whitney F135 combustion chamber burns at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, roughly half the surface temperature of the Sunday. Turbine blades downstream must withstand extreme temperatures while rotating at over 10,000 RPM under massive centrifugal forces. Each blade extracts power equivalent to a race car engine. Materials operate at roughly 90% of their melting point. Manufacturing tolerances are measured in microns, a tiny fraction of the diameter of a human hair. At these precision levels, even microscopic defects can cause catastrophic failure. Single crystal turbine blade manufacturing exemplifies the challenge. Conventional blades have grain boundaries where cracks initiate. Single crystal blades eliminate boundaries entirely, providing dramatically longer service life and allowing operation at significantly higher temperatures. But the manufacturing process is extraordinarily complex and time-consuming. Molten superalloy must be poured and precisely controlled as a single crystal grows. Internal cooling channels, some incredibly small, must be cast directly into the blade, impossible to machine afterward. Production can take many months. Each defect scraps the entire blade. The cost per set runs into hundreds of thousands of dollars. Ceramic matrix composites offer temperature gains but brittleness challenges. They're roughly 1/3 the density of nickel superalloys and can operate at substantially higher temperatures. GE's LEAP engine mass produces CMC turbine shrouds, tens of thousands annually at their Asheville facility. The problem? Zero ductility. Unlike metals that plastically deform, they cannot redistribute stress concentrations. Crack propagation is catastrophic. Water vapor attack at high temperatures requires multi-layer protective coating systems. Variable cycle engines multiply complexity exponentially. Three-stream architecture with adaptive capability toggling between high-efficiency mode and high-thrust mode. Full-authority digital engine control systems must manage thousands of operating points while preventing compressor stall during rapid changes. Every temperature increase requires years of materials research. We're approaching physical limits, and sixth-generation requirements push us even closer to those limits. Here's what this all means. The invisible constraint determining 21st-century air superiority isn't stealth, sensors, or software. It's turbine metallurgy. The United States put the brakes on its sixth-generation fighter, as engine development alone became a $7 billion line item. The F-35 flies with mission-capable rates stuck around 52% after at least 5 years of missing targets, with tens of billions in additional sustainment costs tied to thermal management problems. Russia's Su-57 has been waiting 8 years for its real engine. China spent 3 decades catching up to where the West was 20 years ago. Europe openly admits they're 40 years behind in fundamental research. Only a handful of nations, led by the United States, United Kingdom, France, Russia, and China, possess complete fighter engine development capability from start to finish. Everyone else depends on these few in some form, creating political vulnerability through technical dependence. When Congress blocks Turkish engine exports, $10 billion in Indonesian sales hang in the balance. When GE delays Indian deliveries, Tejas production grinds to a halt. The physics, materials, science, and manufacturing precision required have proven more intractable than any other aerospace technology. Materials operate at extreme temperatures with manufacturing tolerances measured in micron, requiring decades of tacit knowledge that cannot be quickly replicated. The nation that solves the compounding challenges first, ceramic matrix composites in primary structures, thermal management handling dramatically higher heat loads, manufacturing, achieving precision at production scale, control systems, managing adaptive cycle complexity, will possess air superiority advantage measured in decades. The engine problem isn't killing modern fighter programs through dramatic failures. It's grinding them down through delays, cost overruns, and technological gaps that widen faster than incremental improvements can close. You can design a 5th or 6th generation fighter in a decade. You need 3 decades to build an engine worthy of it.